Hello there friends, my name is Rachel, G&S middle. Gilbert and Sullivan is my middle name, and my middle name is my last name. And Daenerys and I are here today to explore the magic of the Gilbert and Sullivan Operas by very pedantically ranking every element of them. Isn't that right, Daenerys? That is what we're going to do today. Today we're going to be looking at the Iolanthe dialogue, and I've actually already introduced this in the video where I actually did the dialogue, but I thought if you just suddenly saw me looking like this, you might get a fright, so I thought I'd introduce the video dressed like this. And Daenerys is here, which is nice. But I'm going to hand over to past Rachel, so here you go, past Rachel. Today we are going to be looking at the Iolanthe dialogue. As a point of interest, I'm filming this just after the Mezzo Aries video, and this is what my hair looked like when it came down. So look, because I have a lot of hair, but this made me look like I have even more hair than I do. So yeah, it's fun to have a lot of hair, and it's something that I like, and I hope to find many more ways of making my hair big and crazy in the future. But yes, that's hair. So I am going to be using the same parameters that I used for my patience dialogue video. I'm probably going to film them all now and then edit that video together and then do like another video where I kind of look at what I've done. It's all very well, but since our queen banished Iolanthe, fairy revels have not been what they were. Iolanthe was the life and soul of fairyland. Why, she wrote all our songs and arranged all our dances. We sing her songs and we trip her measures, but we don't enjoy ourselves. To think that 25 years have elapsed since she was banished. What could she have done to have deserved so terrible a punishment? Something awful. She married a mortal. Oh, is it injudicious to marry a mortal? Injudicious? It strikes at the root of the whole fairy system. By our laws, the fairy who marries a mortal dies. But Iolanthe didn't die. No, because your queen, who loved her with a surpassing love, commuted her sentence to penal servitude for life, on condition that she left her husband and never communicated with him again. That sentence of penal servitude she is now working out on her head at the bottom of that stream. Yes, but when I banished her, I gave her all the pleasant places of the earth to dwell in. I'm sure that I never intended that she should go and live at the bottom of a stream. It makes me perfectly wretched to think of the discomfort she must have undergone. Think of the damp. And her chest was always delicate. And the frogs. Ugh! I never shall enjoy any peace of mind until I know why Iolanthe went to live among the frogs. Then why not summon her and ask her? Why? Because if I set eyes on her, I should forgive her at once. Then why not forgive her? 25 years, it's a long time. Think of how he loved her. Loved her? What was your love to mine? Why, she was invaluable to me. Who taught me to curl myself inside a buttercup? Iolanthe. Who taught me to swing upon a cobweb? Iolanthe. Who taught me to dive into a dewdrop, to nestle in a nutshell, to gamble upon gossamer? Iolanthe. She certainly did surprising things. Oh, give her back to us, great queen. For your sake, if not for ours. Oh, I should be strong, but I am weak. I should be marble, but I am clay. Her punishment has been heavier than I intended. I did not mean that she should live among the frogs, and, well, it shall be as you wish. It shall be as you wish. Okay, so this first scene I do think is a good scene. It's a little bit funny, this feeling inside. It's also a little bit funny ranking these scenes after doing the patience ones, because it's a very different feel, I think. It's much more conversational, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I do sense that a lot of these scenes are going to get quite, oh yes, that was a big yawn, Daenerys. A lot of these scenes are going to get quite a low score for beauty/poetry, just because we've been so spoilt by patience that this one does seem like it's not so sophisticated. And as I say, it's not an issue. And I think that Iolanthe is a lot of people's favourite one for a reason, because it does seem a little bit more conversational, and I would give this scene a narrative importance of 10 completely, because it just delivers exposition so well, and we learn about several characters, well, you know, 2 main characters, and then what the chorus is like, which does it much more successfully than the previous song does, which, discussing in my opening numbers, I remember being surprised at this that Tripping Hither came so low, because it doesn't really tell you who these people are other than, oh, we're fairies and that's interesting. But why is it interesting? Why? As you can see, I'm a fairy today. I'm sporting the most famous fairy of all, Jigglypuff, and fairies have pink hair and flowers, so I wanted to just wear this blue top, which I thought would have been quite a stylish fairy, but it's still cold, even though it's April. It's almost May and it's so cold here. So I only gave this a 5 for poetry. I gave it a 6 for comedy. I think there were a couple of funny bits in it. She certainly did surprising things, but I do think those lines are difficult to deliver because people are very aware that they are funny lines, and it's things that maybe people wouldn't naturally say. So delivering those naturally is extremely difficult. Even in my delivery, even mine, you know, as a great dialogue reader that I am, and actually, no joke, I do think that I probably do read GNS dialogue better than almost anyone I know. So I'm not the best singer, but when it comes to dialogue reading, I do a good job. And that line is very difficult to deliver because it's such a telegraphed, funny line. So, and it's hard to say those, and you can even see in my face, like, I don't really quite know what to do with it, when to deliver the lines. And I do find that there are quite a few lines like this in Iolanthe. There are a few times when Gilbert has really tried to be funny, whereas in Patience, it just seems so effortless. And if you just deliver the lines very naturally, it just comes out perfectly. Same as the Mikado, if you just deliver the lines with conviction, it sounds funny, but I do find some of these lines a little bit more challenging to read. Emotional stakes, I gave an 8. I actually gave it lower at first, but to be honest, that last little section where the Queen is trying to resist the temptation to bring Iolanthe back, and the fairies are convincing her, and then the Queen is recalling her experiences with Iolanthe, it's actually lovely. It's really sweet and touching, and you do get to know who Iolanthe is even before you meet her. Character, I gave a 7. I think that we do learn a bit about the chorus, and we learn a bit about Iolanthe, who hasn't come on yet. And the Fairy Queen, I don't know how much we learn about her yet. We learn a bit, but we just learn about her strength of character when it came to the Iolanthe situation. But I think that you don't really learn much about her until the coming scenes. But still, she has some great lines in this scene. So yeah, I think this is a good scene. I think there have been better scenes in this one. It's a good opening scene, and it's certainly really good for exposition, and I appreciate the existence of it because it gives us a lot of information, and there are some very loved lines in it, and there are certainly ways that actors can make things funny, like, why not summon her and ask her, you know, after a very long pause, or with a very long pause after that line. Yeah, there are just like certain things you can do. It's unclear as to why there just happens to be like one fairy that doesn't know about this and all the others do, but I don't mind that. I think that's in keeping with the kind of universes in which Gilbert writes. Who knows, Fleeta was probably a very young fairy and just hadn't heard of the situation. Maybe she was 16 or something and was born after Iolanthe. And it's just odd that they would suddenly talk about Iolanthe after all this time, after presumably having never talked about her. But, you know, putting all that aside, because it's a silly universe, and it's okay sometimes to slightly suspend one's disbelief. And now, tell me, with all the world to choose from, why on earth did you decide to live at the bottom of that stream? To be near my son, Strephon. Bless my heart, I didn't know you had a son. He was born soon after I left my husband by your royal command, but he does not even know of his father's existence. How old is he? 24. 24? No one to look at you would think you had a son of 24. But that's one of the advantages of being immortal. We never grow old. Is he pretty? He's extremely pretty, but he's inclined to be stout. I see no objection to stoutness, in moderation. And what is he? He's an Arcadian shepherd, and he loves Phyllis, a ward in Chancery. A mere shepherd? And he half a fairy? He's a fairy down to the waist, but his legs are mortal. Dear me. I have no reason to suppose that I am more curious than other people, but I confess I should like to see a person who is fairy down to the waist, but whose legs are mortal. Nothing easier, for here he comes. So this one got a slightly lower score than the scene before it, but it's roughly the same kind of scene. Again, for poetry, I gave it a 5. It's very conversational. And I do think it's fair to dock it points for that, even if that's part of the charm of this show, simply because in Patience, the language was very sophisticated, but I found that it's not at all alienating, and it only heightened the comedy. So I do think Gilbert is at his best when he uses very sophisticated language. But this is there's nothing wrong with Iolanthe as a result. It's just, I just think the Patience dialogue is probably better. But let's go on talking about this scene. I gave it a 7 for comedy. I think it's got a few more funny moments in it. I do like the whole thing about Strephon's legs being mortal. It's a hoot. And the fairy queens, I have no objection to stoutness in moderation. You just have no decorum, do you, Daenerys? No decorum at all. I know, you go for it. You go for it, Daenerys. That's right, no one's judging you here. Emotional stakes, though, I did give a 6. I don't think this scene is as emotional as the last one, which is strange because the song before is so emotionally powerful. That invocation, it's just absolutely glorious, that song, and really sets the scene very well. Then she comes on and it's just like, oh, okay, so tell me. It's just, I'm okay. And I don't mind that, but it is interesting how the reunion after the song finishes isn't a bit more kind of emotional than this. I suppose there's ways of doing that as performers and directors. There's probably ways of making this very emotional, but the lines itself are, again, just quite conversational, really. Character I gave a 7 to. I do think you learn a bit more about the Fairy Queen. Again, the stoutness line, it's such an iconic line and for a very good reason. But Iolanthe, I mean, do you really learn who she is in this scene? Because we've heard in a previous scene that she taught all the dances and all the songs, but she's only talking about her son in this scene. You never really get to know who she is. That's one of my issues with Iolanthe, is that the actor / director really has to decide exactly how Iolanthe acts and behaves, and often she's a bit boring, dare I say. And yeah, it's good for actors to think of ways to make her less boring, but she's a difficult character to play in that nothing she says is really about her or what she wants. It's all just, oh, I've got a son now and he's my world and I live through him, you know. But again, narrative importance, I gave a 10. This is excellent storytelling. So Gilbert really has got it together when it comes to imparting information. The information is imparted so easily and so clearly. When I watched Iolanthe with my boyfriend, who didn't know anything at all about the show, he just immediately understood the story, whereas others, because he's watched all but I think 2 of them now, and in a lot of other ones we've had to pause it for me to explain what's going on, but this one, it was just so immediately clear. And I think that's the lines that make it clear, not necessarily the specific performance we were watching. It's a very easy story to understand, even though it's about all kinds of magical, weird stuff. But yeah, again, great scene, Gilbert, just not as sophisticated as the scenes in Patience. Meow, kitty. Meow. Then the Lord Chancellor has at last given his consent to your marriage with the beautiful ward Phyllis? Not he, indeed. To all my tearful prayers he answers me, a shepherd lad is no fit helpmate for a ward in Chancery. I stood in court, and there I sang him songs of Arcady with flageolet accompaniment, in vain. At first he seemed amused, so did the bar, but quickly wearying of my song and pipe bade me get out. A servile usher then, in crumpled bands and rusty bombazine, led me, still singing, into Chancery Lane. I'll go no more. I'll marry her today and brave the upshot, be it what it may. But who are these? Oh, Strephon, rejoice with me. My queen has pardoned me. Pardoned you, mother. This is good news indeed. And these ladies are my beloved sisters. Your sisters? Then they are my aunts. A pleasant piece of news for your bride on her wedding day. Hush! My bride knows nothing of my fairyhood. I dare not tell her lest it frighten her. She thinks me mortal and prefers me so. Your fairyhood doesn't seem to have done you much good. Much good! My dear aunt, it's the curse of my existence. What's the use of being half a fairy? My body can creep through a keyhole. But what's the good of that when my legs are left kicking behind? I can make myself invisible, down to the waist, but that's of no use when my legs remain exposed to view. My brain is a fairy brain. But from the waist downwards, I'm a gibbering idiot. My upper half is immortal, but my lower half grows older every day, and some day or other must die of old age. What's to become of my upper half when I've buried my lower half, I really don't know. Poor fellow. I see your difficulty, but with a fairy brain, you should seek an intellectual sphere of action. Let me see, I've a borough or two at my disposal. Would you like to go into Parliament? A fairy member. That would be delightful. I'm afraid I should do no good there. You see, down to the waist I'm a Tory of the most determined description, but my legs are a couple of confounded radicals, and on a division they'd be sure to take me into the wrong lobby. You see, they're 2 to 1, which is a strong working majority. You shall be returned as a Liberal Conservative, and your legs shall be our peculiar care. I see your Majesty does not do things by half. No, we are fairies down to the feet. Okay, so this one did a little bit better than the scenes before it. I actually gave it a 39 out of 50. It's a pretty good all-rounder, really. Several 7s in there, an 8, and again, a 10 for narrative importance. So it got a 7 for poetry. I appreciate Strephon's speech. I think that's very eloquent language. I much appreciated that. An 8 for comedy. Honestly, the business about Strephon being worried about his legs being mortal and his top half being a fairy just never fails to be funny. And also his big speech at the beginning, followed by, who are these? And it's weird that Iolanthe hasn't like listened to anything he said about Phyllis and the Lord Chancellor. Oh, Strephon, rejoice with me. I don't care about what you've just said. I don't think that was intentional, but I find it amusing. I gave it a 7 for emotional stakes. I think that we do get to learn a bit about Strephon and what he wants. We get to learn about him being in love with Phyllis, and we certainly get to hear some quite emotive language from him. I only gave it a 7. I don't think it's hugely emotionally impactful, but still, I appreciate there is some emotion in there. Again, I only gave it a 7 for character. I don't really think that Gilbert has made very compelling characters in this opera so far, if I am being very honest with myself. I do love the Fairy Queen, and she has become a little bit clearer in this scene and the one before than she was in the first scene. But thinking about Strephon, I do feel like at this stage, I think I get who Strephon is, that he is a person who has 2 capacities, i.e. fairy and mortal, and Tory and radical, which in itself is very confusing to me, because the way he says Tory, it's as if that is the fairyish thing to be, which to me is the opposite. And I am fully aware, and I just checked on Wikipedia as well to make sure that I wasn't about to say something stupid, but the Tories, yes, they were a totally different party back in the 19th century, but by the point of writing this opera, they had become the name for the Conservative Party. They were not the Tory party that dissolved sometime in the 1820s or 1840s. Besides, it's been dissolved for a while by the time of this writing. And it's just odd to me that somebody like Strephon, who is very at one with nature and is in love with a shepherdess, would ever associate himself with the Tories. And perhaps that's, again, just me with my modern sensibilities not quite understanding the needs and wants and desires of people back then. But does that seem weird to anyone else? It's weird that they would have chosen the kind of hippie fairy half to go with the Tories, and then the bottom half to go with the radical/liberal, because radical did pretty much mean liberal, I think. That to me is odd. I get that in this scene, Strephon is unable to reconcile these parts of himself. But the weird thing is that we don't ever really see that come up again. And I wonder if the whole half a fairy thing was introduced just for a joke, really. Because yes, obviously it comes up again in a scene with Phyllis later on, and it's mentioned an awful lot, but we don't ever get to see the fact that he's half a fairy and half a mortal. That's never kind of a plot point later. That's never a deciding factor for anything. We never really hear what he feels about it after this. So, I don't know. I do find that this character formation isn't very skillful. And I did find that when I was reading these scenes, and this is totally due to me having not thought really about how I would play this part, but I found myself playing Strephon slightly differently in every scene because I never really quite got a handle on who he was. I actually found something similar with the Lord Chancellor, but I know the Lord Chancellor's a great part. Me and Will talked about that at length, and that's just purely because it was actually something that Will said about having to bring the emotion of that final scene kind of back into the opening scene, like that's still the same person. And I think I was thinking too much of that, and maybe I made him a bit too nice. I don't know. So I'm still not kind of sure on how I would play the Lord Chancellor, or indeed Mountararat and Tolloller. So Strephon, I do find he's really vivid in individual scenes, but overall, I'm not really sure which one is him. I'm going to get further into that issue in later scenes as well. Narrative importance, I gave it a 10. This opera is just so well written when it comes to delivering the story, and every scene you learn something new and you build upon what's already been said in earlier scenes. I just think it's very skillfully crafted.
My Phyllis, and today we are to be made happy forever.
Well, we're to be married.
It's the same thing.
I suppose it is. But oh, Strephon, I tremble at the step I'm taking. I believe it's penal servitude for life to marry a ward of court without the Lord Chancellor's consent. I shall be of age in 2 years. Don't you think you could wait 2 years?
2 years? Have you ever looked in the glass?
No, never.
Here, look at that, and tell me if you think it rational to expect me to wait 2 years.
No, you're quite right. It would be asking too much. One must be reasonable.
Besides, who knows what will happen in 2 years? Why, you might fall in love with the Lord Chancellor himself by that time.
Yes, he's a clean old gentleman.
As it is, half of the House of Lords are sighing at your feet.
The House of Lords are certainly extremely attentive.
Attentive? I should think they were. Why did 25 Liberal peers come down to shoot over your grass plot last autumn? It couldn't have been a sparrow's. And why did 25 Conservative peers come down to fish your pond? Don't tell me it was the goldfish. No, no. Delays are dangerous, and if we are to marry, the sooner the better.
So let me get something straight first. I love reading this scene as Phyllis. I have played Phyllis 3 times. I love playing her, and I love delivering these lines. However, this scene is actually not as good as I thought it was. I think it's a good scene out of context. So if you were doing like a concert of best scenes, I don't know if you call something that's just dialogue a concert, but if you were doing like a series of really great scenes, this is up there. This is a really good scene. So perhaps it's my parameters that are wonky. But looking at it now, the thing I find cloying about it is what I alluded to in my previous scene clip. So it seems to me that the Strephon that was talking about singing songs of Arcady with flageolet accompaniment, but all in vain, that Strephon is just nowhere to be found in this scene. Like, this Strephon is a kind of boring, jealous person. And yeah, that he's funny, and they're both saying funny things. I gave it a 7 for comedy. I think it is a funny scene. But I find that actually the characters are quite weak. I gave it a 6, because I do think that Phyllis does have some really good stuff, and they've made her pretty vibrant. And even what frustrates me about Phyllis and Strephon is that I often see people direct them and play them as very unlikable people, and I think that there's some validity in that, because on the surface they're saying some quite unpleasant things. So Strephon's kind of quite jealous and possessive of her, and then Phyllis is just like, oh yes, he is a clean old gentleman, yes, I might fall in love with him. And I suppose that, yeah, you could take that to an unlikable place, but I think as a director / performer, I would never make a choice that made me unlikable. So if I was presented with this material, I'd probably more likely go through the kind of stupid / scared route. So I'd probably more likely go down to Phyllis as a bit of an airhead, or she loves Strephon and maybe she's teasing him a bit, or maybe she does kind of quite like the attention. Maybe she's just a bit immature, There's this need to kind of label characters as good or bad, and I think that these are two flawed characters, but I don't see them as unpleasant, and I don't like it when they're actually hostile to each other. I think it's much nicer when they just have flaws and they're just a bit immature and really not ready to get married at all. So that's the charm of this scene. But I will maintain, so I think there's good ways of playing this scene and it's not problematic at all, but I will maintain that I don't see the Strephon in the previous scene in this scene. He doesn't seem like a kind of fun, like fairy-ish guy in this scene. He just seems like an ordinary guy who's really jealous. And I just find that a bit stupid and boring, to be honest, even though he's a funny guy and he says funny things. I gave it an 8 for narrative importance. I do think we learn a bit about Phyllis and the Lord Chancellor. And, oh yeah, the joke about the mirror. Okay. So the way I direct this and the way I delivered it just then, I tend to deliver lines like this now where there's an obvious double meaning, but we don't know, but it's not written in the script what the actor should do. When I'm presented with that option, I leave it up to the audience. That's what I tend to do, because neither of the two options make me feel good. One of the options is that he's saying she's going to age 2 years and by then she'll have like gone off and he wouldn't like her anymore, just saying, oh yeah, no, I do see that. And the other option is, he's saying, oh, you are so hot, like how can you possibly expect me to like not marry you for another 2 years? And then she's like, oh yeah, I can quite understand it. Or there's another option where he actually means the first and she thinks he means the second. I suppose you could even subvert it so that he was actually intending to say you look amazing and she took it as, oh yeah, no, I am old. So I don't know, people find that quite funny, and for some reason, it just really grates on me when the Phyllis kind of looks at the mirror and goes, oh yes, I quite understand it. There's something about the delivery of that line that I find annoying. I think it's just this like lazy, oh, I'm so beautiful humour. I don't know. Maybe I'm being unreasonable because I find the soprano character speech in the Mikado before she sings Sun Who's Raised, I find that speech hilarious. I don't know, it's just there's lots of lines in Iolanthe that are very much like, this is a funny line, this is a funny line, you are under pressure to deliver this in a funny way, and I do find that troubling as a line, and I know that I handled it wrongly as a director last time because I told the Phyllis to just do it like I just did just then and be, or no, I quite understand it would be asking too much, just to kind of leave it just completely vague, as if we think that people should know what it's about, but actually we're not telling you.
But maybe that's disingenuous. What do people think about this line? Tell me why I'm cross about it. I don't understand why it makes me cross when people deliver it that way. Is it just too obvious? Is it just... I think I have this overall hatred when sopranos speak like this, and often I just see Phyllis going, no, I quite understand. So maybe it just has to be said, no, I quite understand it. And then she's like obsessed with herself. You know, I think there's probably ways of doing it that wouldn't be cringy, but I think that my hatred of this line isn't the fact that she's meant to find herself pretty, because that can be funny, but it's the fact that it's often delivered in a way that just I find really cringy. Let me know what you think. I gave this scene quite a low mark. I gave it a 32 out of 50, but that's still, you know, well over half marks. And I think that the other Strephon and Phyllis scene will do a lot better than this one. But I do think it's got issues, especially with character. And I actually don't think it's as funny as I remember it. I don't think it's, like, hilariously funny. But, you know, tell me I'm wrong. And now, my lords, to the business of the day. By all means. Phyllis, who is a ward of court, has so powerfully affected your lordships that you have appealed to me in a body to give her to whichever one of you she may think proper to select. And a noble lord has just gone to her cottage to request her immediate attendance. It would be idle to deny that I myself have the misfortune to be singularly attracted by this young person. My regard for her is rapidly undermining my constitution. 3 months ago, I was a stout man. I need say no more. If I should reconcile it with my duty, I should unhesitatingly award her to myself, for I can conscientiously say that I know no man who is so well fitted to render her exceptionally happy. Hear, hear! But such award would be open to misconstruction, and therefore, at whatever personal inconvenience, I waive my claim. My lord, I desire on the part of this House to express its sincere sympathy with your lordship's most painful position. I thank your lordships. The feelings of a Lord Chancellor who is in love with a ward of court are not to be envied. What is his position? Can he give his own consent to his own marriage with his own ward? Can he marry his own ward without his own consent? And if he marries his own ward without his own consent, can he commit himself a contempt of his own court? And if he commit himself a contempt of his own court, can he appear by counsel before himself to move for arrest of his own judgment? Ah, my lords, it is indeed painful to have to sit upon a woolsack which is stuffed with such thorns as these. My lord, I have much pleasure in announcing that I have succeeded in inducing the young person to present herself at the bar of this house. So, I do really like this dialogue, and I'll just reiterate again, I didn't really think I got a good handle on who the Lord Chancellor was when I read this. I think I'm overthinking some of the things that Will and I discussed, actually, and I'm not really sure how I play him. Also, you know, the fact that I am more used to playing the traditionally female characters does somewhat hinder me when I take my skills to the more traditionally male characters. However, some of them did seem to happen very easily. We'll get into that a little bit later. But I do like this scene, and I do think that you do learn who the Lord Chancellor is. I don't think I portrayed that very well, but the fact that he is a person who just religiously follows this law, and might even seem quite boring, but certainly lovable, and, you know, maybe, like, at worst, like a bit of a job's worth, like someone obsessed with red tape and somebody who's a bit bitter because of his past, but he's not a nasty guy by any means. And I think that you do get to learn a little bit about him. So I've given that an 8 for character. And as well as that, you get to see Mountararat and Tolloller as well. These two also don't really have very well-formed characters, and I'm going to get into that later as well. There are just so many choices you can make with these characters that the words on the page don't scream something in particular. So it's really down to the individual director, actors, how to do this. I gave it an 8 for narrative importance. I do think it is good that they've introduced the Lord Chancellor and explained a bit about the problems he's having and just setting the scene for Phyllis to come in. So I do think that this scene is narratively successful, maybe just not quite as much as some of the ones before it. I give it a 7 for comedy. I do think what the Lord Chancellor says is funny, and an 8 for poetry, actually, because I just love the Lord Chancellor's lines. As Will says, he gets these great monologues, and the words he says just trip off the tongue, and it's really nice to say. Yeah, comedy, like, I didn't give it higher than a 7. I don't think it's screamingly funny, but it is good, and you just think, oh, this is like a funny, like, bumbling guy. And especially after his song as well, the law is the true embodiment of everything that's excellent. It has no kinds of fault or flaw, and I, my lords, embody the law. Like, lyrically, that is so good. And that just says who he is immediately. So, yeah, it would be such an adventure to really embody this character, as Will did over the course of a year. He played it 3 times in a year. And there's so much to get into here, but he's not as vivid a character, so he's not as easy to just pick up the script and read as I did just now. So, yeah, really, really interesting character. And, yeah, just an interesting scene. So I do like this scene, not quite as much as the one where the fairies and Strephon are talking, and Strephon's talking about being half a fairy, but this one is a really great one. 37 out of 50 I gave it, which is a good enough mark, it's fine. Maybe this is just a personal preference. Like, tell me if you think that the Iolanthe scenes are better than the Patience scenes because of this more conversational quality they seem to have. And also, I think that the satire in this one is a bit more cutting, because Patience, yeah, that is something that you could apply to any day and age, but politics are very personal, and liberal versus conservative is something that a lot of people feel very deeply about. I mean, I would say that there is a categorical difference between people who care very much about conservatism and people who care very much about being liberal. As Caitlin Moran says, the Conservatives, when they vote, are thinking of quite frivolous, low-stakes things compared to Liberals. When Liberals vote, they are thinking of people's lives, and especially when poorer people who vote Liberal, that they're literally voting to try and save their own lives, and so of course they're going to get really angry about it. But when Conservative people get angry, it's like, what are you angry about? Like, your way of life is not even at all under threat. Like, what are you making such a fuss about? But anyway, these issues are things that do arouse a lot of anger in people. And so just seeing politicians behave in a very silly way is very cathartic, I think, for either side, really, but especially for people who just loathe this elitism, which I do. I hate elitism, and Tolloller and Mountararat are just so absurdly posh, and this world is so insular, and so to make as much fun of that as we can is a very good thing. Now, sir, what excuse have you to offer for having disobeyed an order of the Court of Chancery? My lord, I know no courts of chancery. I go by nature's acts of parliament. The bees, the breeze, the seas, the rooks, the brooks, the gales, the vales, the fountains and the mountains cry, you love this maiden, take her, we command you. 'Tis writ in heaven, by the bright barbed dart that leaps forth into lurid light from each grim thundercloud. The very rain pours forth her sad and sodden sympathy. When chorus nature bids me take my love, shall I reply, nay, but a certain Chancellor forbids it? Sir, you are England's Lord High Chancellor, but are you Chancellor of birds and trees, King of the winds and Prince of thunderclouds? No, it's a nice point. I don't know that I've ever met it before. But my difficulty is that at present there's no evidence before the court that chorus nature has interested herself in the matter. No evidence? You have my word for it. I tell you that she bade me take my love. Ah, but my good sir, you mustn't tell us what she told you. It's not evidence. Now, an affidavit from a thunderstorm or a few words on oath from a heavy shower would meet with all the attention they deserve. And have you the heart to apply the prosaic rules of evidence to a case which bubbles over with poetical emotion? Distinctly. I have always kept my duty strictly before my eyes, and it is to that fact that I owe my advancement to my present distinguished position.
So I think there is a reason that Will showed this scene specifically to me when we were talking about the Lord Chancellor the other week. Because to me, this scene, I found way easier to read him as a character. It's so obvious the kind of person he is. Like, he's not at all mean. He's listening to Strephon, like he's hearing him out. And he's actually being very logical with him. Like, he's not trying to just get him out of the room for no reason. He's saying, you know, let me hear you out, but I'm going to reply to you in, you know, legalese. And the way he replies so matter-of-factly, you do really get the impression of who he is now. There's this person who, I mean, we don't know this yet, but he has been very broken-hearted in his past. And he's responded to that by just kind of shutting himself away inside his own head and like dedicating himself to the law and trying not to feel all these emotions that he didn't understand all those years ago. It's bizarre to me to think that this is a person who met a fairy 20 years ago or 24 years ago and had a relationship with her and then thought she died, and then he became a Lord Chancellor. Like, what's the story there? He's a very interesting guy. But not only that, Strephon is also way more vivid in this scene. We're finally getting the Strephon from the first scene back. So this is the romantic, loving Strephon who'll do anything to gain Phyllis's hand in marriage, and who is so eloquent in the way he talks about her. Like, why can't he talk to Phyllis like this? Maybe he does. Maybe we just caught them at a weird snapshot. But I do, like, I've never really thought about this before, but I do find it a bit weird and actually a bit jarring that Strephon talks about Phyllis so romantically and eloquently, but then with her, he's not very nice to her, really. And she's also not very nice to him. I mean, is it just immaturity? Maybe it's pure immaturity, but you'd think that if this was the truth in this scene, which I feel it must be, you couldn't be that eloquent without really meaning those words, then why doesn't some of that carry over to his interactions with Phyllis? Like, is that purely a job for the actor? Has anyone else thought of this before, and how have you dealt with it? Because honestly, this has never occurred to me before I filmed this all yesterday and then watched it back. It never actually occurred to me how weird that is. But now that it has occurred to me, I find it jarring. Has anyone else thought of it, and how have you got over it? But anyway, this scene I think is amazing. I've given it a 9 out of 10 for beauty/poetry. I've given it a 9 out of 10 for comedy. Oh my god. I mean, I know I was really over-egging that pause there. That was also inspired by William Remmers. I gave it an 8 for emotional sakes because, hey, Strephon really is being very emotive here. I only gave it an 8 because I don't know if it was quite meant to be emotional, or if it was purely for the purpose of just getting that funny. No, I don't think I've ever met that point before, so I don't think the emotion used in the scene is really designed to be anything more than a kind of lead up to a joke. But it's still there, and it is still emotion, which I appreciate. Character, I've given a 9, as I say that I think the characters are just portrayed way better and more vividly in this scene, and I found them much easier to read than when Strephon's being all weird and jealous and odd. Narrative importance, I gave an 8. I don't think this scene is quite so narratively successful as some of the others, but it is still very good. It's more of a chance to settle into their characters and see these two interact because, spoiler alert, they're father and son. So it's good that they have a scene now. And it's good for the audience to see like what their relationship is, and the fact that the Lord Chancellor isn't just throwing him out and being mean. Like, he is listening to him and he is a compassionate guy. He's just very much sticking to the letter of the law and, yeah, a bit of a job's worth at worst. But he's traumatised, and traumatised people do weird things. Oh, Phyllis, Phyllis! To be taken from you just as I was on the point of making you my own. Oh, it's too much. It's too much. My son in tears, and on his wedding day. My wedding day? Oh, mother, weep with me.
for the law has interposed between us, and the Lord Chancellor has separated us for ever. The Lord Chancellor? Oh, if he did but know. If he did but know what? No matter. The Lord Chancellor has no power over you. Remember, you are half a fairy. You can defy him. Down to the waist. Yes, but from the waist downwards he can commit me to prison for years. Of what avail is it that my body is free if my legs are working out 7 years penal servitude? True, but take heart. Our Queen has promised you her special protection. I'll go to her and lay your peculiar case before her. My beloved mother, how can I repay the debt I owe you? So, I don't think this scene could ever have done hugely well because it is a little bit shorter, and I do think it is one of the more forgettable scenes of this opera. But having said that, you know, it doesn't get a really low score. I gave it a 35 out of 50. I think it's got some lovely language in it. I gave it an 8 out of 10 for beauty/poetry. I only gave it a 6 for comedy. It does have that line in that I don't know if it's meant to be funny or if people just see it as funny today. And this is also something that Will and I were discussing in relation to the Lord Chancellor. The Lord Chancellor, oh, if he did but know. If he did but know what? I can see how that may have been intended to be funny, and I don't hate it, but it does very much telegraph what's going to happen at the end. I know that when I watched it with my boyfriend, he went, "Oh, the Lord Chancellor's Strephon's father, isn't he?" And I went, "Yeah." You know, it does rather telegraph the ending, and it's a bit irritating that Gilbert sometimes seems to lose faith in himself in a way, and makes a parody of himself in a way that is actually like detrimental to his stories. I just wish that he'd not made this joke and maybe just had Iolanthe portray that there was something wrong in a different way. So I've given it a 6 for comedy because I do think that's kind of funny, but at the expense of the big reveal later, which is a bit problematic, really. I gave it a 7 for emotional stakes. I think that Strephon is clearly very upset here, and Iolanthe comes to comfort him, and there's definitely some mother-son stuff going on, which is kind of nice, kind of cute, and it's very sweet the way she cares for him. She's very sacrificial when it comes to Strephon. She really does want him to be happy above anything. Character I gave a 7. Again, like, we just don't really get to learn too much about Iolanthe, and we don't learn anything more about Strephon. I don't think his character has progressed very much. They're not really... They're acting consistently with their characters, which is why I gave it a 7, but I don't think their characters are as vivid maybe as the Lord Chancellor and Strephon in the previous scene. There the characters just leap off the page, but here it's not so easy. Strephon does seem, again, to be his romantic self and not his, like, bitchy self, and I like that. I prefer that, and I wish there was a way to kind of take that energy into his scenes with Phyllis, but I don't see how you can with the lines being the way they are. So we'll see. I mean, maybe I'll discover something later when I discuss the next Phyllis and Strephon scene in Act 2. But yeah, I don't find this scene particularly mind-blowing. I don't think this is many people's favourite scene. It's... We did something funny in Fulbert where Strephon had this moustache on because he had to, like, sing in the Piers chorus, and he ripped it off for "'Tis I, young Strephon." And then the Lord Chancellor puts it back on him at the end for some reason. And then Iolanthe goes, "Strephon," rips it off, and he goes, "Ah!" And he goes, "I'm in tears." So, you know, we made that line, you know, funny. But that was just us being silly. That wasn't even my idea. Usually in Fulbert Theatre, I just kind of have a room full of really silly people, and people just come up with an idea that they probably think, "Oh God, this is such a stupid idea, Rachel will never go for this." And then they say it, I'm like, "Yes, let's immediately do that." People are often surprised that I just will take on, like, every idea. And yeah, I'm a bit of an idea vampire. I want to suck everyone's ideas out of their bodies. You seem annoyed. Annoyed? I should think so. Why, this ridiculous protégé of yours is playing the deuce with everything. Tonight is the second reading of his bill to throw the peerage open to competitive examination. And he'll carry it too. Carry it? Of course he will. He's a parliamentary Pickford. He carries everything.
Yes, if you please. That's our fault.
The deuce it is.
Yes, we influence the members and compel them to vote just as he wishes them to. It's our system. It shortens the debates.
Well, but think of what it all means. I don't much mind for myself, but with a house of peers with no grandfathers worth mentioning, the country must go to the dogs.
I suppose it must.
I didn't want to say a word against brains. I've a great respect for brains. I often wish I had some myself. But with a house of peers composed exclusively of people of intellect, what's to become of the House of Commons?
I never thought of that.
This comes of women interfering in politics. It so happens that if there is an institution in Great Britain which is not susceptible of any improvement at all, it's the House of Peers.
Charming persons, are they not?
Distinctly. For self-contained dignity, combined with airy condescension, give me a British representative peer. Then pray, stop this protégé of yours before it's too late. Think of the mischief you're doing.
But we can't stop him now. Oh, aren't they lovely?
Oh, why did you go and defy us, you great geese?
So I've actually combined two dialogues here because the second dialogue, which involves all the same people, was so short and it was just carrying on from what they've been talking about. So I combined them all into one. And I do think this scene is very funny. I gave it a 9 for comedy. There are so many great moments. I don't want to say a word against brains. I often wish I'd had some myself. You know, there's lots of good lines in there. Why did you go and defy us, you great geese? There's a lot of very vivid imagery, which I do like. I only gave it a 6, though, for character. I don't think you really know exactly why these people are doing what they're doing, and that's also why I gave it a 5 for narrative importance. It's interesting to me how the last time you've seen the fairies, they're being very defiant in the Act 1 finale, and I don't mind the fact that they've fallen in love with the peers. I just wish I knew why. I just wish I knew what it was that they'd done. I mean, maybe there's just something irresistible about humans, but if that's the case, I just wish that was made clear. And the Fairy Queen does somewhat make it a tiny bit clearer, but she doesn't just say, oh yes, there's a thing where like fairies are really attracted to humans. Like, I wish that was set up earlier on, so we know that, oh yeah, it's forbidden for fairies to marry mortals because mortals are irresistible to fairies, but if they were to breed with them, they die out. So it's probably not a good thing for any fairy. So it's best just to make a blanket rule about it. Like, that's what I would imagine is the scenario here. But then, if that was the case, they would just fall in love with the peers instantly they saw them. But maybe they do. I mean, maybe that has to be telegraphed somewhat in the Act 1 finale as well. I just find this whole fairy suddenly falling in love with the peers thing a bit strange, and I don't really understand what that's about. It's very funny, but I do think this is the worst section of Iolanthe narratively. This sounds like I'm being very down on Iolanthe. I'm really not. I do really like Iolanthe, but I just happen to like a lot of the other ones better. I think the overall story of Iolanthe is really, really good. Most of these scenes have got really high narrative importance marks. In fact, this is the only one that probably won't get a high mark. But I do find the storytelling, it just goes a bit wonky here. But we don't have like the beauty and poetry and the emotional stakes, which I only gave that a 5. We don't have the beauty, poetry or emotional stakes to kind of back that up. Maybe this scene could have been higher in emotional stakes if the words had been slightly different. Like, maybe Gilbert should have placed way more weight on the fact that fairies will just automatically fall in love with humans when they see them. And that's not obvious. It just makes all the fairies seem really fickle
and boring, because they just happen to fall in love with these people for literally no reason. Like, honestly, I literally don't know why they do fall in love with them. It's obviously something to do with the fact that they're proud of being in the House of Peers, but the song, When Britain Really Ruled the Waves, is famously kind of about how rubbish the House of Peers is and about how they don't really do anything. So are you telling me that the fairies fell in love with them because of that song? It doesn't add up to me. That there's something, it has to be another reason. It has to be just because there's something intoxicating about these people to fairies. That has to be the reason, but that's not made clear. And so because of that, I just find this a bit irritating, even if it is very funny. And I love the song In Vain to Us You Plead. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely love that song. I don't like When Britain Really Ruled the Waves so much. I love In Vain to Us You Plead. I love the fairies as a chorus. They were maybe my third favourite chorus or something, that they came really high in my list of choruses. And that is also because of this. I love the fact that they get to fall in love with the peers, but narratively, it does kind of suck a bit. So while the fairies are a great chorus, I just wish there was a bit more clear motivation to why this happens. And it is one area that I would consider maybe adding in a small, tiny addition to the text somewhere, maybe that made that a little bit clear. So yeah, let me know what you think about this scene and give me your explanation to why the fairies fall in love with the mortals. Like, are they just really that attractive? Is it a coincidence? Let me know in the comments. Oh, shame, shame upon you. Is this your fidelity to the laws you are bound to obey? Know you not that it is death to marry a mortal?
Yes, but it's not death to wish to marry a mortal. If it were,
you'd have to execute us all. Oh, this is weakness. Subdue it.
We know that it's weakness, but the weakness is so strong.
We are not all as tough as you are.
Tough?
Do you suppose that I am insensible to the effect of manly beauty? Look at that man. A perfect picture. Who are you, sir? Private Willis, B Company, 1st Grenadier Guards. You're a very fine fellow, sir. I am generally admired. I can quite understand it. Now, here is a man whose physical attributes are simply godlike. That man has the most extraordinary effect upon me. If I yielded to a natural impulse, I should fall down and worship that man. But I mortify this inclination. I wrestle with it, and it lies beneath my feet. That is how I treat my regard for that man. Oh, what a joy this scene is, mainly for just how funny the Fairy Queen and Willis are, and the fact that she's just able to speak very openly about how attractive she finds him while he's just standing there, and he's just like, yeah, I am generally admired, but he's just, doing that British stiff upper lip thing and just not saying anything. The comedy here is off the scale. I've given this a clear 10 for comedy. I think it is just so funny. It's even like a little bit emotional because you do feel a bit sorry for the Fairy Queen here while she's being very funny. So I gave it a 7 for emotional stakes. I think it's good. 7 for poetry as well. I think that some of her language is actually really lovely, and I think is a bit more sophisticated than some of the language earlier in this opera. I also gave it a 9 for character. The Fairy Queen is just such a vivid character in this scene. It's just so easy to play her and make it funny because what she's feeling is so clear. And I've said this again and again and again, but for me, the better characters / scenes are ones where the characters make it really clear what it is they want and why they are doing what they are doing. And when they want something that they can't have and have to explain that, then that's very funny. And just the fact that she's being so eloquent in her words towards him, but she isn't allowed to actually pursue that. It's just so funny that she's using this real person as an example and just speaking so matter-of-factly about it. If I were to yield to a natural impulse, I would fall down and worship that man. You know, naturally, she would. And so this is where I feel like I wish it was obvious earlier on that fairies have this weakness for mortals. I don't think that's really made overtly clear anywhere in the opera. And I wish it was clear, because it would make why the fairies fall in love with the peers a bit more obvious. And I love her following song. That's also a really great one. I've not talked about the alto arias yet, but I certainly will. And I think this one will do pretty well. I gave it a 7 for narrative importance. I appreciate that this is unravelling the slight tangle we've got ourselves into with the fairies and peers. And it gives the fairy queen a chance to show... It gives the fairy queen another chance to restate how awful it is when fairies marry mortals. Again, she doesn't say why. Do you see what I mean? How I love Iolanthe. It is one... I mean, I probably wouldn't say it's one of my favourite ones, actually. I'd say it's probably middle of the pack for me, personally. It does have a few narrative weaknesses, even if some of the scenes itself do a really good job with narrative progression. There's just a few little things I just wish we could just tweak. And actually, nothing in it, I think, is nearly as bad as Patience is about turn at the end of Patience. I still think it's stronger than that. It's just that Patience has such well-constructed dialogue in the individual lines itself. But Iolanthe is, I think, a clearer story. It just has these kind of weird moments in it. I can't think why I'm not in better spirits. I'm engaged to 2 noblemen at once. That ought to be enough to make any girl happy. But I'm miserable. Don't suppose it's because I care for Strephon, for I hate him. No girl could care for a man that goes about with a mother considerably younger than himself.
Phyllis, my darling! Phyllis, my own!
Don't! How dare you! Oh. But perhaps you're the 2 noblemen that I'm engaged to.
I am one of them. I am the other.
Oh, then, my darling. My own. Well, have you settled which it's to be?
Not altogether. It's a rather difficult position. It would be hardly delicate to toss up. On the whole, we would rather leave it to you.
How can it possibly concern me? You are both earls, you are both rich, and you are both plain.
So we are. At least, I am. So am I.
No, no.
I am indeed. Very plain.
Well, well. Perhaps you are.
There is really nothing to choose between you. If one of you would forego his title and distribute his estates amongst his Irish tenantry, why then I should see a reason for accepting the other.
Tolloller, are you prepared to make this sacrifice?
No.
Not even to oblige a lady?
No, not even to oblige a lady. Then the only question is, which of us shall give way to the other? Perhaps, on the whole, she would be happier with me. I don't know, I may be wrong. No, I don't know that you are. I really believe she would. But the awkward part of the thing is that if you rob me of the girl of my heart, we must fight, and one of us must die. It's a family tradition that I have sworn to respect. It's a painful position, for I have a very strong regard for you, George.
My dear Thomas.
You are very dear to me, George. We were boys together. At least, I was. If I were to survive you, my existence would be hopelessly embittered.
Then, my dear Thomas, you must not do it. I say it again and again. If it will have this effect upon you, you must not do it. No, no, if one of us is to destroy the other, let it be me.
No, no.
Ah, yes, by our boyish friendship I implore you.
Well, well, be it so. But no, no, I cannot consent to an act which would crush you with unavailing remorse.
But it would not do so. I should be very sad at first.
Oh,
Who would not be? But it would wear off. I like you very much, but perhaps not as much as you like me. George, you're a noble fellow, but that telltale tear betrays you. No, George, you are very fond of me, and I cannot consent to give you a week's uneasiness on my account. But dear Thomas, it would not last a week. Remember, you lead the House of Lords. On your demise I shall take your place. Oh, Thomas, it would not last a day.
Now, I do hope you're not going to fight about me, because it's really not worthwhile.
No, I don't believe it is. Nor I. The sacred ties of friendship are paramount. So this is a big one. This is a really huge scene, and it's another one that automatically gets a 10 out of 10 for comedy for me. It's a very iconic scene. It's a very loved scene. I've given it pretty high marks across the board. I've only given it a 7 for narrative importance, because I don't think it does too much to further the narrative, and I think that the whole Piers liking Phyllis is a little bit confusing anyway, because these two characters, they kind of glorify chorus principles, and they're not individuals. They just kind of represent one thing, and it is very funny, and I think they're great characters. I would love to play Tolloller and Mountararat one day, but it's just that they're not terribly vivid individually, and their specific needs and wants are not terribly clear, because it seems they're just utterly head over heels in love with Phyllis in the first half, but then they seem to prefer to just keep the peace between themselves. When I initially directed Iolanthe, because I directed Iolanthe 3 times before Bear Theatre, actually. Twice in 1 year, then once for Harrogate a couple of years later. So I've really got to know these parts and this scene extremely well. And the struggle I had was that I couldn't stand it when in productions you'd see Tolloller turn to Mountararat and say, because I have a very strong regard for you, George, and kind of do it kind of romantically, and then the audience would laugh, and there's something about that never really sat quite well with me, because I felt like it's kind of laughing, it's like making a gay joke, and it felt quite uncomfortable. So I actually tried my very best all 3 times I did it to just make it completely non-romantic, and every time I failed. She always tries to make things unromantic, and every time she fails. I really struggled with this scene being platonic, because the language is just so passionate. It really seems, even just on the page, without putting a voice in your head while reading it, the language is very emotional, and you really do get that these people care for each other. And I think because in this day and age it's so, you would never hear, well, I say never, I think it is getting a little bit better now, but you wouldn't until recently have heard two platonic male friends talking like this to each other. And that's why it seems like either they're being really sarcastic and not meaning what they're saying, or it's romantic. But in actual fact, I don't think that this was ever intended to be romantic at all. I think that they just really care for each other as friends, and their comments to each other, that they are trying to get through their desire for Phyllis, their desire to not seem scared, even though they are really scared at the prospect of duelling to the death, and their friendship for each other. And that's why this scene is so funny. So I'm certainly not saying it's lazy to make it romantic. I mean, I myself made that choice because I found that people automatically place romance onto it, even when you do nothing as a director. If you just say the lines, people laugh because they think it's romantic, and I don't like people laughing at that. So I felt, oh, the only choice I have is to totally double down on it and make it a thing that actually goes back into the first act, and to make Tolloller and Mountararat genuinely very repressed and actually in love with each other. And lest we forget, it is actually possible for men to be in love with each other and also be in love with a very pretty girl, because, you know, bisexual people exist. You know, who would have thought it? But I think that this is the trap that a lot of people fall into. They kind of think, oh, they can't be gay because they like Phyllis. It's like, I'm not saying they're gay. Maybe it's not even a kind of a sexual thing. Maybe it's a kind of romantic, asexual kind of love they have for each other. I mean, but like, however you play it, it is very difficult to read this language and not read something romantic into it. But I am sure that Gilbert did not intend it to be read in that way. And that doesn't mean that you can't do that. I think by all means we can take Gilbert's words and make them mean whatever is fair to the text. Just as a side note, whenever I talk about things being fair or unfair to the text, or whenever me and Will talk about that, it's because in the Shakespeare company that I work for, that I've toured with a lot, the director was once in Stratford watching a production, I think it was Measure for Measure, and then it was quite a weird production. I think there was a piece of staging where God came down or something. There was something really odd that happened, but somebody in the audience stood up and just started going, unfair to the text, unfair to the text, unfair to the text. And that's all I know from the story. Like, I don't know what happened as a result of that, so don't ask me, but I find that very funny. So whenever I say the words fair to the text, that's what I think of, and that's why I often have a smile on my face when I say that. I think that whatever is fair to the text is where you don't have to twist the text for it to mean what you think it means. And so a totally valid interpretation, modern interpretation of this, is that they are in love with each other. But then I found that reading it just now, it's actually totally possible for them just to be really fond of each other as friends. And you actually don't really often see it done like that. You often see it done where they're kind of mean-spirited and are actually quite sarcastic. But it is possible for them to be really torn here. Like, well, the awkward thing of the matter is, George, that if you were to rob me of the girl of my love, I might have to fight you, and I don't want to fight you because I'm really fond of you, George. And maybe that's how I should have read it, actually. I was kind of reading it in quite stuffy voices, but maybe they open up a little bit, and maybe this is a chance to, maybe when I direct this again, I will use this as another opportunity to show people that, you know, men can actually be friends and speak to each other in, you know, emotional language and say, I really like you. You're my friend, and I don't want to kill you. And you know what, actually, she's not worth it. She's not worth it. And the thing is, that is exactly what Gilbert intended. And I have been in Iolanthe like 8 times. I've directed it, well, I mean, I've been in it 4 times, directed it 3 times. And it's never occurred to me just to do it as it's written, because I've literally never seen it done like that. I've always seen it with a kind of romantic spin on it, or I've seen it where they're sarcastic. I've never really seen it where they're actually genuinely meaning that. And please, by all means, if you think I've seen your version of Iolanthe where you try to do that, please let me know and put me right, because it's possible I'm just forgetting some production of it that I saw ages ago. But yeah, isn't that interesting that it never actually occurred to me just to do it the way that Gilbert wrote it? It's just hard. It is really hard, but that is definitely what I'll try next time, just to do it as if they really are just sweet friends. But, you know, it was a chance to have a gay kiss at the International Gilbert and Sullivan Festival, and I think that it was a good thing to do that, just to kind of open people up to more interpretations of the text, just to kind of give people a bit of diversity, just to show people, oh yeah, you know, gay and bisexual people exist. You know, women are people too. It's good to hammer home these messages, and any chance to hammer home these messages that LGBTQ people exist is, I think, a good thing. So yeah, this scene, I gave it an 8 for character. I think Phyllis is wonderful in it. She's so funny. I can't think why I'm not in better spirits. You know, she's just such... She's so materialistic, but in a way that's kind of lovable and likeable, or at least I think it should be. Like, I don't like it when Phyllis is played and you don't like her. Like, why would you ever want to be unlikable on stage? Like, just give her some kind of likability. Even if you make her, like, airheady, just give her some kind of softness or some kind of vulnerability, and that just totally takes that away. Emotional states, I gave an 8, because you know what? These guys, they really like each other, and they're really trying to avoid each other dying. You know what? I'm going to read this scene again, like knowing what I know, so in these clothes. So I'm going to include the next one as well, just so you see, after I've talked about it, maybe I'll have like a different view on it. But yeah, comedy 10, poetry 8. I actually think the poetry is really pretty in it. Character 8, narrative importance 7, because I don't think it really furthers a narrative a ton, but it does a little bit. But yeah, I'm going to read this scene again.
I can't think why I'm not in better spirits. I'm engaged to 2 noblemen at once. That ought to be enough to make any girl happy.
But I'm miserable. Don't think it's because I care for Strephon, for I hate him.
No girl could care for a man that goes about with a mother considerably younger than himself.
Phyllis, my darling! Phyllis, my own!
Don't! How dare you!
But perhaps you're the 2 noblemen I'm engaged to. I am one, I am the other.
Oh then, my darling, my own. Well, have you settled which it's to be?
Not altogether. It's a difficult position. It would be hardly delicate to toss up. On the whole, we would rather leave it to you.
How can it possibly concern me? You are both earls, you are both rich, and you are both plain.
So we are. At least, I am.
So am I.
No, no!
I am indeed. Very plain.
Well, well. Perhaps you are.
There's really nothing to choose between you. If one of you would forego his title and distribute his estates among his Irish tenantry, why then I should then see a reason for accepting the other.
Tolloller, are you prepared to make this sacrifice?
No.
Not even to oblige a lady?
No. Not even to oblige a lady.
Then the only question is, which of us shall give way to the other? Perhaps, on the whole, she would be happier with me. I don't know, I may be wrong.
No, I don't know that you are. I really believe she would. But the awkward part of the thing is that if you rob me of the girl of my heart, we must fight, and one of us must die. It's a family tradition I have sworn to respect. It's a painful position, for I have a very strong regard for you, George.
My dear Thomas.
You are very dear to me, George. We were boys together. At least, I was. If I were to survive you, my existence would be hopelessly embittered.
Then, my dear Thomas, you must not do it. I say it again and again, if it will have this effect on you, you must not do it. No, no. If one of us is to destroy the other, let it be me.
No, no.
Ah, yes. By our boyish friendship, I implore you.
Well, well, be it so. But no, I cannot consent to an act which would crush you with unavailing remorse.
But it would not do so. I would be very sad at first. Oh, it would not be. But it would wear off. I like you very much, but not, perhaps, as much as you like me.
George, you're a noble fellow, but that telltale tear betrays you. No, George, you are very fond of me, and I cannot consent to give you a week's uneasiness on my account.
But, dear Thomas, it would not last a week. Remember, you lead the House of Lords. On your demise, I shall take your place. Oh, Thomas, it would not last a day.
Now, I do hope you're not going to fight about me, because it's really not worthwhile.
Well, I don't believe it is.
Nor I. The sacred ties of friendship are paramount. I am much distressed to see your lordship in this condition. Ah, my lords, it is seldom that a Lord Chancellor has reason to envy the position of another, but I am free to confess that I would rather be 2 earls engaged to Phyllis than any other 6 noblemen upon the face of this globe. Yes, it's an enviable position, when you're the only one. Oh yes, no doubt, most enviable. At the same time, seeing you thus, we naturally say to ourselves, this is very sad. His lordship is constitutionally as blithe as a bird. He trills upon the bench like a thing of song and gladness. His series of judgments in F-sharp minor given andante in 6/8 time are amongst the most remarkable effects ever produced in a court of chancery. He is, perhaps, the only living instance of a judge whose decrees have received the honour of a double encore. How can we bring ourselves to do that which will deprive the court of chancery of one of its most attractive features? I feel the force of your remarks. But I am here in two capacities, and they clash, my lords, they clash. I deeply grieve to say that in declining to entertain my last application to myself, I presume to address myself in terms which render it impossible for me ever to apply to myself again. It was a most painful scene, my lords. Most painful. This is what it is to have two capacities. Let us be thankful that we are persons of no capacity whatever. Come, come! Remember, you are a very just and kindly old gentleman, and you need have no hesitation in approaching yourself, so that you do so respectfully and with a proper show of deference. Do you really think so? I do. Well, I will nerve myself to another effort, and, if that fails, I resign myself to my fate.
So this is another scene that I don't think is terribly memorable. I think people generally think of If You Go In, which is a trio that I do happen to really love, even if I think I maybe placed it a little bit high in that trio's list. But the scene itself I don't think is hugely funny. I mean, I still gave it a 7 for comedy. I think it's got some lovely moments. And I happen to think Mountararat's big speech is very silly. We naturally say to ourselves, this is very sad. I think the thing I like about this scene is how sweet it is that the peers are kind of putting their own feelings about Phyllis aside to help the Lord Chancellor through this issue that he's got. It's less so he can marry Phyllis, I think, and more just to kind of spur him on and like help him speak to himself. And actually, the fact that they claim to have no brains and they've appeared pretty stupid earlier on in the opera, they're quite clever to be saying the things they're saying. I mean, I guess that this is an example of how oratory or just public speaking is a different thing to actual intelligence, as Plato will tell you extensively in the Gorgias. I think it's Gorgias. But if anyone else has philosophy at university, you'll know what I'm talking about. I think that there's a lot of oratory in this opera, and the way that the peers talk might seem sophisticated, but actually only on the surface, and really it's quite shallow. But the Lord Chancellor says some really intelligent things, and I love the fact that he's trying to kind of work out this problem logically, but then the fact that he does kind of manage to manipulate his way out of the problem does show that maybe he doesn't have quite as much respect for the letter of the law as we thought he did, because he's clearly trying to manipulate it to suit his own ends. But it's only kind of once he does that he realises, oh, maybe that wasn't what I really wanted after all. But of course we will get into that in 2 scenes' time. But this is a good scene. I don't think it's really high on this list compared to some of the others. I think that I remembered the scene as better than it was because it comes directly before If You Go In, which is always very funny, and that's something I always really look forward to. But the scene itself, apart from that great line about being in 2 capacities, let us be grateful, let us be thankful that we are persons of no capacity whatever. But again, that's one of those lines that is a very funny line, and Gilbert is telling you that it's funny, and it's quite hard to deliver that without telegraphing it. It's very difficult to deliver that naturally, as if that's just a thing that people would say. And delivering these lines with conviction, as if the characters really mean what they're saying, is, I think, the key to unlock a lot of Gilbert's comedy. But I find in Iolanthe that doesn't always come super easily, and this scene is an example of that. But still, it's a good scene. I do like it. I gave it 7 for emotional stakes. I do think that the Lord Chancellor is feeling something, and they are trying to help him work it out. 8 for character. You do get to see the Lord Chancellor a bit in distress. Of course, we've just had the Nightmare song, so this does follow from the Nightmare song, and it is nice to see them give him that relief after he was so anxious in that song, because that's the first time you really see him properly unravelling, the Lord Chancellor. It's the first time you really get to see inside his head, so it's heartwarming to see him start to fix that problem. Even if we are rooting for Strephon and Phyllis, we are also rooting for the Lord Chancellor to be happy, in a way. And I think, we can sense that he's not going to end up with Phyllis even at this point, but we still don't like to see him distressed, and it's nice
to see the peers kind of standing up for him here, and it's a nice thing. I suppose one ought to enjoy oneself in Parliament when one leads both parties, as I do. But I'm miserable. Poor broken-hearted fool that I am. Oh, Phyllis, Phyllis!
Yes?
Phyllis! But I suppose I should say my lady. I have not yet been informed which title your ladyship has pleased to select.
I haven't quite decided. You see, I have no mother to advise me.
No, I have.
Yes, a young mother.
Not very. A couple of centuries or so.
Oh, she wears well.
She does. She's a fairy.
I beg your pardon. A what?
Oh, I've no longer any reason to conceal the fact. She's a fairy.
A fairy? Well, but that would account for a good many things. Then, I suppose you're a fairy.
I'm half a fairy.
Which half?
The upper half. Down to the waistcoat.
Dear me. There's nothing to show it.
Don't do that.
But why didn't you tell me this before?
I thought you would take a dislike to me. But as it's all off, you may as well know the truth. I'm only half a mortal.
But I'd rather have half a mortal I do love than half a dozen I don't.
Oh, I think not. Go to your half dozen.
It's only 2, and I hate 'em. Please forgive me.
I don't think I ought to. Besides, all sorts of difficulties will arise. You know, my grandmother looks quite as young as my mother. So do all my aunts.
I quite understand. Whenever I see you kissing a very young lady, I shall know it is an elderly relative.
You will? Then, Phyllis, I think we will be very happy.
We won't wait long.
No, we might change our minds. We'll get married first.
And change our minds afterwards.
That's the usual course. So, this is one of my favourite scenes to read in the canon. If I was asked as an auditionee to just read a random piece of GNS dialogue, this would be one that I would like to read. I'd probably also choose the one between the soprano and tenor in the Mikado as well. Like, that's also a really good one. It's so funny. I gave it a 10 for comedy. Again, like the witch half, and that would account for a good many things. That's really good. I don't think it's the most sophisticated when it comes to poetry. I gave it a 7. I think that it's perfectly good language for Gilbert to use. Emotional stakes, I gave an 8 too. I do think these characters really do love each other. They're just very immature and they do want to get back together. And, you know, character, I gave an 8 too. I didn't quite give a 9 because, again, we're seeing this inconsistency with Strephon. We're seeing him being kind of overly sassy when we've seen him being so loving and forceful in his remarks about how much he loves Phyllis earlier. And now she comes along, he's unable to express himself. Maybe that's just because he's immature. I mean, maybe there's something to be had in that. Like, maybe Strephon is a person who is able to write kind of romantic opuses in his spare time, but actually when he comes face to face with someone he loves, he's just like, oh, hi. You know, that could be it. Maybe that's what it is. So maybe Strephon's just like a little bit awkward when he's actually around Phyllis because they're just a bit emotionally mature and don't quite know how to deal with each other yet. And also, I can definitely see why he feels let down, because Phyllis didn't really listen to his explanation of why he was with this woman, because presumably they weren't like kissing with tongues. So there could definitely have been an explanation to what they were doing, and why didn't she just listen to him? And okay, here is what I don't get about Iolanthe, okay? So, Phyllis must know of the existence of fairies because she sees the fairies come on. She hears the fairy queens say mortals. I mean, unless that's an aside, I don't really think it is though. It seems quite obvious that these are supernatural beings. And then she says, should they launch terrific thunders or should then repent their blunders? So she understands that they have powers. She can obviously see that they look young.
didn't she just put two and two together here? Why is she so surprised? Like, I beg your pardon, what? As if she doesn't know what a fairy is. Like, Phyllis, you've just seen fairies. Like, either she's very stupid, or she like, didn't know they were fairies, or she knows of the existence of fairies, but for some reason didn't assume that Iolanthe was one, even though Strephon very clearly said, she's my mother. And why couldn't she just think, yeah, I know that fairies never do grow old, so maybe she really is his mother. Like, why wouldn't she make that connection? Is that like a plot hole, or is that something that's explainable? Because it's something that doesn't really matter in the context of the story. Like, I still give this scene 9 out of 10 for narrative importance. I think it's a great scene, and it gets them back together, and it's really cute, really sassy, really cracking scene. Like, I have no problems at all with this scene, but this is just like a point that I think about, and I wonder if anyone else has thought about that. The reaction of the Lord Chancellor and the peers is very underwhelming in the Act 1 finale, considering that they've never seen fairies before, or never even known of fairies. Like, their reaction to them is not that extreme, and they very quickly just become used to their presence. And maybe it's a bit like Wi-Fi. You know how, like, when I was a child, I would never have dreamed that, like, such a thing as Wi-Fi existed. Or that you could just, like, go onto the internet and just watch anything you wanted. Which I do pay for, by the way. I do not pirate things. But like, the fact that you can just watch anything you want. That would have seemed magical to me, but I really quickly got used to it, to the extent that I was watching RuPaul's Drag Race earlier on today, and it kept buffering, and I was like, oh my god, why is this happening? And I get so frustrated, because I now just expect everything to work really smoothly, but like, yeah, even like 10 years ago, that would have happened like all the time, things buffering, and I would have just accepted it. But we get really used to things quickly, so maybe that's kind of what it is with the fairies. Maybe the peers, you know, are really shocked for a moment, but then they're just like, oh, okay, these people exist. And actually, they are so out of touch that maybe the fairies existing isn't even that remarkable to them. Maybe that's the way you get through it. But does your mother know I mean, is she aware of our engagement? She is. And thus she welcomes her daughter-in-law. She kisses just like other people. But the Lord Chancellor...
I forgot him. Mother, none can resist your fairy eloquence. You will go to him and plead for us?
No, impossible.
But our happiness, our very lives depend upon our obtaining his consent.
Oh, madam, you cannot refuse to do this. You know not what you ask. The Lord Chancellor is my husband.
Your husband?
My husband and your father. Then our course is plain. On his learning that Strephon is his son, all objection to our marriage will be at once removed. No, he must never know. He believes me to have died childless, and, dearly as I love him, I am bound, under penalty of death, not to undeceive him. But see, he comes, quick, my veil.
Victory! Victory! Success has crowned my efforts, and I may consider myself engaged to Phyllis. At first, I wouldn't hear of it. It was out of the question. But I took heart. I pointed out to myself that I was no stranger to myself, that, in point of fact, I had been personally acquainted with myself for some years. This had its effect. I admitted that I had watched my professional advancement with considerable interest, and I had handsomely added that I yielded to no one in admiration for my private and professional virtues. This was a great point gained. I then endeavoured to work upon my feelings. Conceive my joy when I distinctly perceived a tear glistening in my own eye. Eventually, after a severe struggle with myself, I reluctantly, most reluctantly, consented. So I can definitely see why Will really likes this scene as the Lord Chancellor, and I can definitely see why he likes to make that little cut that we talked about in our Paterolles video. So what would happen there would be Iolanthe would say, the Lord Chancellor is victory, victory. And he would interrupt that, so you don't get the wife reveal until the song, which I think is a really good thing, because even though Iolanthe's lines after that line are quite nice,
I don't think what she says is worth telling the audience who she is yet, because there's still a chance that people don't know. As I say, I think some people do get it from just the if he did but know line, but some people definitely won't have got it, and those that do would kind of feel clever for knowing that, whereas when it's delivered in the scene it does feel a bit anticlimactic, and yeah, and it does sometimes get a laugh, and I don't really quite know why. I think it's because it's just a bit jarring and a bit cringy. Like, it's because it's not funny. It's just, but people laugh because I think it's just bad writing, to be honest. It's not good to like reveal something so big before it's the correct time to. And the correct time to me, behold, it may not be, I am thy wife. Like, that to me is where people should know who she is. I talked about this yesterday when I was making my Mezzo Arias video, and it's just such a glorious moment. And I don't know if strictly that bit is kind of included in the aria, but it is just so powerful. And the idea of revealing that earlier, I just think is a bit wet, really. I just think it's a bit of an anticlimax. But the Lord Chancellor's speech when he comes in, I think is absolutely beautiful. I think that alone has given this scene for me like a 9 in emotional stakes, a 9 for character, and a 9 for narrative importance. I think that is so beautifully delivered in the way that Gilbert has written it. And his most reluctantly consented. I think often I've seen people play that off, but no, you should actually read Gilbert's words and kind of mean what he's saying. Because unless it's very, very obviously sarcastic, I don't think Gilbert did sarcasm a lot. And even when there is a valid reading of a line which involves sarcasm, I always tend to think it's more interesting to choose another reading of the line that doesn't involve sarcasm, because it doesn't, for me, it doesn't really read too well with Gilbert's lines anyway. But his most reluctantly consented. And it's possible that the way I read it then, I mean, as I say, I've not really read these lines before, so I've not really thought too much about them, but you can go back to our Paterol's video and watch Will deliver this far better than I did. I honestly think that he goes into this speech not knowing how he's going to come out of it. And I'm the kind of person that will often change my mind while speaking. You know, you've seen me for months now doing these videos, and often I'll start speaking about a song and I'll talk myself into the song being way better or worse than I thought it was. And it's no exception with Gilbert's characters themselves. I think that they do change their minds quite rapidly, and I think that the Lord Chancellor is living in this daze where he's like, Phyllis, 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 she is my focus. And it's only once he actually has got to the stage where, oh, I've consented now. Oh. And then it's only in that moment where he realises, oh gosh, you know, maybe that wasn't what I wanted. And then Iolanthe comes in, and that's his actual wife, who he hasn't seen in 24 years and who he thinks is dead. And it's like... So this is a great scene, but I also think that I'm marking it kind of overly high in anticipation of the song that follows it. So there is a tie with another scene here, and I'm probably going to put this one lower than the other one, but because I think that a lot of the scene before the Lord Chancellor comes in, it isn't terribly remarkable. I mean, I only gave it a 6 for comedy. I don't think it's that funny at all. There's some lovely language though. I gave it an 8 for poetry because of the Lord Chancellor's speech. And yeah, it gets 9s for emotional stakes, character and narrative importance. I do think this is a lovely scene, but just I've dropped a few marks just because I think that I may be adding some of the effect of the song that follows it onto the scene, which I should not be doing, but it's kind of impossible not to do that sometimes.
Hold! If Iolanthe must die, so must we all. For, as she has sinned, so have we.
What?
We are all fairy duchesses, marchionesses, countesses, viscountesses and baronesses.
It's our fault. They couldn't help themselves. It seems they have helped themselves, and pretty freely too. You have all incurred death.
But I can't slaughter the whole company, and yet the law is clear.
Every fairy must die who marries a mortal.
Allow me, as an old equity draftsman, to make a suggestion.
The subtleties of the legal mind are equal to the emergency. The thing is really quite simple. The insertion of a single word will do it. Let it stand that every fairy shall die who doesn't marry a mortal. And there you are. Out of your difficulty at once. We like your humour. Very well. Private Willis. Mom. To save my life, it is necessary that I marry at once. How would you like to be a fairy guardsman? Well, ma'am, I don't think much of the British soldier who wouldn't ill-convenience himself to save a female in distress. You are a brave fellow. You're a fairy from this moment. And you, my lords, how say you? Will you join our ranks? Well, now that the peers are to be recruited entirely from persons of intelligence, I really don't see what use we are down here, do you, Tolloller? None whatever. Good. Then away we go to fairyland.
Okay, so I take back everything I've ever said about these pre-Act 2 finale scenes being typically not so good. Because so far, all of the Act 2 finale, all the pre-Act 2 finale scenes haven't done very well. Like at the Sorcerer, HMS Pinafore, even Patience, Pirates of Penzance. Well, they don't actually have one in the Pirates of Penzance. They don't really have a pre-Act 2 finale scene. But this one is actually really, really good. And I know that some people think it's a bit lazy, that Lord Chancellor adding in a single word, but the thing is, when it comes to Gilbertian conventions, I think this is a very clever version of that. And I would say that this scene is actually clearly come top of the list. It's got 45 out of 50, which really surprised me. I never thought a pre-Act 2 finale scene would do this well. I mean, I think I always had in the back of my mind that I didn't really mind this one, and I thought this one was better than most of them. But yeah, this is actually a really great scene in itself, and I would say probably the strongest scene of the opera. First of all, something which I hadn't considered in my chorus video. I know that when I talked about the choruses, I added in that little bit afterwards where I was just filming my cat and talking about Princess Ida, about how the ladies, the students of Ida, they actually drive the plot because they refuse to do what Ida tells them. And I've just realised, wait, the chorus in Iolanthe are actually hugely important because they have fallen in love with the peers, which is a plot point that I actually found quite narratively weak. But the fact that the fairies have fallen in love with the peers is what saves Iolanthe's life, because the queen is about to kill her. The only reason the queen doesn't is because she realises, well, I'll have to slaughter everybody. And so the stakes here are life and death, but it's also very funny. And when the Lord Chancellor talks about, well, you know, the insertion of a single word will do it, you know, that's... He is very aware that if he says this in the wrong way, she's still going to kill Iolanthe, and indeed everyone on stage, well, all the fairies anyway. And yeah, so everyone on stage is really invested in this ending. So in a way that not a lot of choruses are truly invested in the story in the same way that the principals are, but in this case, like everybody on stage, it's very high stakes for everybody there, but it's also really funny at the same time. And there are so many really good lines in it. So, like, it seems like they have helped themselves and pretty freely too, and then the whole Private Willis. And it's just, everything is wrapped up so neatly. Every character that you've seen, actually apart from Phyllis, weirdly, but every character apart from Phyllis and Strephon, who have already been wrapped up a while ago, gets their chance to speak. And you know what they feel about the situation. So it's not done hurriedly. It's done in a way that's beautiful, like language-wise. When I gave it an 8, I think the language is really lovely in this scene. I gave it a 10 out of 10 for comedy, because honestly, it is just so funny. Well, now that the peers are to be recruited entirely from persons of intelligence, I really don't see what use we are down here, do you? It's just so cutting, but in a way that's very charming, and it's very clever politically. And again, it's something that people on both sides of the political spectrum can enjoy, you know, because it's just, we're just laughing at you know, the rich elite. We're not laughing at either side in particular. So it's just something that we can all really enjoy. And just the fact that the stakes have been so high, we have just had this hugely emotional moment. This scene is just a complete breath of fresh air. And then the Act 2 finale is just so beautiful and so joyful. You know, it's a reprise of like one of the best trios in the canon. I just think that this scene is such a charming way to end the show, and I would go as far as to say that it is actually the best scene in the show, just in terms of how skillfully it wraps everything up and does so in a way that really represents each character. I think in previous scenes you see characters being given lines which they wouldn't necessarily say just in order to get the information across, but this time it really is about the characters and about the way they get out of this situation. And it's so powerful that this chorus actually drives the plot. The chorus saved the day. Isn't that cool? I'd never thought about that before. How it's the fairies' decision to actually take this huge risk and go against what the Queen was saying that saves the day all along. And I just wish that their motivations for doing so were just a little bit clearer. That's the main takeaway I have from this video. So we're going to do a little rundown of where everything came up, and in 14th place we have the scene with the peers and the fairies that is in between, that, you know, straddles Britain really rules the waves and in vain to us you plead, which I do think is funny, but yeah, it just suffers from that problem that I've been going on about all the way through this video. Number 13 I have given to the Act 1 scene with Phyllis and Strephon, just referring to this problem with Strephon. I've been talking about how he seems like a different person in that scene to the rest of the opera, because you can kind of see why he's a bit salty in the Act 2 scene, but in this it just kind of makes no sense and just makes him a bit unlikable. And I do think it's really confusing for actors and directors when they see Strephon presented like this. Number 12 I have given to the scene with Iolanthe and Strephon just before the Act 1 finale, and I think that's because it's just quite short. It's got some charming moments in, but yeah, it doesn't really have much to it. Then at number 11 I have given to Iolanthe, Fairies and Queens. That's the second scene in the opera. That's when Iolanthe has just been invoked, because it's the invocation. I think that's the right word. That she's just been brought back. And again, it's a nice scene, but I just think there are better ones. And there's nothing particular that like sparkles in it. There are no screamingly funny lines in it. Number 10 I have given to the very first dialogue of the show, the Fairies and Queen. Again, it's a lovely dialogue and I think it's got some really funny lines in it, but it's very conversational, and the Queen does make it when she comes in. It's similar in structure actually to the first scene of Patience, but that one I just felt had more emotion in it and it was just a bit more vivid and exciting as a result. Number 9 I've given to the scene between the peers and the Lord Chancellor, just after the Lord Chancellor's entrance song, where they talk about Phyllis. And I do think this is funny. The Lord Chancellor certainly has a really great speech, but I don't really think at this point it's really clear exactly who the peers are. We know they like Phyllis, but that's all we know about them. It doesn't leap off the page in a way. The number 8 I have given to the scene with Tolloller, Mountararat and the Lord Chancellor that's before If You Go In. I think it's a really sweet scene. It's not like hugely funny. There's like no real standout moments in it, but there's lots of very charming little bits and pieces in that scene, and it is one that I do like a lot. Then number 7 I have given to the scene with Strephon and the Fairies, where he's talking about his legs being mortal and his top half being a fairy. It's so funny. There's lots of potential for a huge amount of comedy here, you know, because it gets an 8 for comedy, that one. And it's just a very silly and funny scene altogether. It gets a very high mark for narrative importance. Yeah, really, really great scene. I do like that one. Number 6 goes to the scene with the Fairies and the Queen and Private Willis just before Foolish Faye. Absolutely love the Fairy Queen in this one. She is so fierce. She is just so sure of herself and so matter-of-fact about her feelings for Private Willis, and that makes me super happy, and it brings me so much joy to see that scene. It's very difficult to mess that scene up, I think. Number 5 I have given to the scene with Strephon, Phyllis and Iolanthe, and actually the Lord Chancellor comes in at the end. It mainly gets this high ranking because of the Lord Chancellor's speech at the end of it. I don't really think the bit with just the 3 of them is up to much before that, but the Lord Chancellor's speech is just so emotional and really tells you what he's been through and who he is now as a result of having gone through all of that, and just where he is in his head.
after the Nightmare song and If You Go In, I just think this is the perfect way of seeing, yes, he's like completed this journey, and now, oh, I've completed the journey. Now what do? Do I marry her? And it's just, I think that's just a wonderful opportunity for an actor, and I can see why Will absolutely loves that. Number 4, I have given to The Scene Before Friendship's Name, with Phyllis and Tolloller and Mountararat, you know, with Willis also silently in attendance. Such a funny scene. I even redid it because the way I talked about it made me want to redo it. I think this is a really, really funny, sweet scene. It's a good example of male friendship, or, you know, romance if you want to put that spin on it, but just the way they speak to each other, it's so funny, and it also can be quite emotional, and just so many kind of subversive moments where Phyllis says, well, I do hope you're not going to fight about me, and I'm like, well, yeah, it's not worthwhile, actually. I love that. I love it when Gilbert surprises us. Number 3, I have given to the second act scene with Strephon and Phyllis. What a great scene. I think this scene is just so utterly pretty and charming, and Strephon's so salty in it, but you can see why he is, because Phyllis has been a bit stupid. But also Strephon could have been clearer too. These two need to communicate more. But yeah, absolutely love this scene. It's one of my favourite scenes as a performer. Number 2 then I gave to the scene between Strephon and the Lord Chancellor. I didn't even rate this scene much before I spoke to Will about it the other week, but it's just so funny, and it's really vivid in terms of who both of these people are, Strephon and the Lord Chancellor. They're represented so colourfully in this scene, and I think that this scene is actually really important for those two characters to get across the kind of people they are, and just to establish their relationship, so that later when we find out they're father and son, it's like, oh, because they did get on quite well then, you know? And for people that know that they're father and son already, it's nice for them to see that already they kind of have like a chemistry, you know? But then the big surprise at number 1 is the pre-act 2 finale scene. I couldn't believe this one did so well, but it's just so funny. The emotional stakes are high. Like, everyone on stage is like scared for their lives. Every character is represented really well. The language is lovely, and it just wraps everything up in such a clever way. Like, all of these loose ends go. I like doing that. That was nice for my fingers. So thank you so much for watching this video. This was a lovely one to do. I am definitely enjoying these dialogue videos more than when I started. I love like getting to do the dialogue. So continue to assure me that that's the right thing to do. And yeah, there's a number of links in the description. I have linked to, that's Jigglypuff. That is the description. I have linked to where you can buy tickets for the Gondoliers at Hever Castle on the 28th of May. I have linked to a page where you can buy tickets for the Grosvenor Light Opera Company Grand Duke, where I am playing Lisa. I've also included a link to the patron page on the Forbear Theatre website, where if you like, you can set up a donation for us. You can do either a one-off donation or you can do a monthly one. Any amount of money is just so gratefully received. We've already had a few donations, and honestly, the difference between not getting donations and the donations I've got so far have meant that I'm not going to make a loss doing the Gondoliers. It's just, even though I've not received like too much, it's just anything you can send just makes such a difference to me. Even like £5 means I can buy myself lunch, you know, and because I put so much of my own money into these shows that even just a little amount to help me out is just so appreciated, because we lose so much money doing these shows every time. And I'm so proud that the donations we've got so far mean that we will not make a loss in Gondoliers. I mean, we're not going to make a profit. We just kind of barely break even, because the money that was profit, I'm just using to pay myself a very small fee, which I've never got to do before. So I'm very excited about the fact that I'm actually going to get paid a little bit. Not nearly enough, but like a little bit, for all the work I've done for this company. So yeah, anything is really gratefully received, so thank you very much. I'm going to release like more information about the Friends of Forbear in the coming months. We're going to do a whole thing, and it's going to be great. But yeah, again, thank you for watching. Let me know if you agree with stuff I've said. Please click like, please click subscribe. it all makes me feel very good and very happy, and I just burped. And I will see you for the next video.
We must reinstate the course at once.
Say no more, headmaster. I'll go and iron my jacket.
Refrain, presumptuous sir, your suit from pressing. Go, revolt, get your hands. You are dismissed from this vicinity. This is the consequence of ill-advised affinity.
This is the consequence of ill-advised affinity.
For I hold that in this school we comply with every rule, and I cannot such an indiscretion overlook.
No more can the teachers nor the students nor the cook.
No more can the teachers nor the students nor the cook. No more can the teachers nor the students nor the cook. The teachers nor the students nor the teachers nor the cook.
When at school one is fully employed,
Like you.
and your subject's been warped and destroyed,
Like who?
it's by whom you will live. Culture and cool.
Besides which, if we help her resolve the matter quickly, she may take pity on us and reconsider the school's closure.
I can hear you, Mr. I'm standing right here.